everyone, and welcome to Brad the DM. Strixhaven, a curriculum of chaos. Year 1, Session 9. Below the Sedgemoor. Alright everyone, this is basically the home stretch of the campaign. I just have 2 sessions left, and then if you want to hear about it, I'll do the epilogue session. I think basically I'm going to, but just establishing 2 sessions left for year 1. In short, the party are going to do some cave exploring below the swampy area known as the Sedgemoor. Basically, we need to gather some supplies in order to make the antidote, or whatever you call it, to basically neutralize the black ooze that has, caused so much chaos on campus thus far. That's the main bulk of the plot of this session. There's a bit narratively to, draw the party in and keep the stakes up and interesting, and I'm not going to spoil all of that here, but trust me, there's a reason that this is one of my favorite sessions of this year. This and, I believe it was Campus Daredevils, where we broke into Dappling Manor, were 2 of my favorite ones just narratively. But yeah, this entire session was just a homebrew thing that I made for my homebrew campaign, and then I modified to work within the Strixhaven setting. Basically, cave exploring, various tunnels, and then some of the bad guys I borrowed from, that setting. Because they do feel fitting here. And trust me, whenever you see everything, you'll be like, that does make sense. So yeah, without further ado everyone, let's get to session number 9, Below the Sedgemoor. Alright everyone, this is Brad the DM, Strixhaven, a curriculum of chaos. Year 1, session number 9, Below the Sedgemoor. Really quick for this title card, just a cool bit. This is actually a picture that I took when I went down to Hocking Hills with my buddies for, the guys trip down back in 2023. Basically poured through all the pictures trying to find, something that fits. Because, just trying to use images and such where I can. But yeah, so that's where this is from. Just a little fun fact about my life. To start things off, in my personal story, I have a little pre-session cutscene. Basically, throughout my version of the story, we've had Urzmaktok as an NPC ally. So basically, his involvement is kind of a big deal. But basically, off-screen, Professor Trotsky and Urzmaktok have been trying formulas to neutralize the ooze. Then a quick scene of Professor Trotsky and Urzmaktok in the lab. Basically, they've gone through various reagents trying to make something that, oh god, I keep forgetting the word, nullifies the black ooze. And they've stumbled on white bell caps. Basically, I just took regular mushrooms and just decided, oh, these are fancy special ones. They're white bell with an E. Because I don't think they're spelled like that normally. I hope not. But yeah, just give me that. The details don't matter. It's just, this is just something, a MacGuffin that the party is going to pursue that leads to the adventure. So it could be, red bell caps, blue bell caps, not mushroom stuff, etc. Alright, we'll need more. We can't be sure of the concentration within the Sedgemoor. Because also, we have some presumption that it is within the Sedgemoor. Because, various insects and animals have been affected by this, growing larger and attacking things. We have the frogs from the frog races, we have the sturge and the rats from session 2. So, just saying. But yeah, we'll need more if we can't be sure of the concentration of the Sedgemoor. Agreed. I can get more samples from the Sedgemoor caves in the morning. That's Urzmaktok speaking. And then Professor Trotsky, female character. I don't really have a voice, so just pretend with me for a second. Most excellent. I'll prepare the other ingredients, and we can prepare for cleansing the Sedgemoor as soon as possible. Urzmaktok, do take care in the caverns. We haven't heard of any attacks, but with spring break there are fewer students in the caves, and that could lead to potential danger. The next morning, Urzmaktok left a note explaining he was going into Sedgemoor caverns with his roommate, a dwarf miner named Merrick. Merrick, I believe, Stormshield, I call him. We'll see later on in the episode. Basically, they're good roommates, and he knows the mines pretty well, so he wanted to tag along. Merrick originally, and I think I say this elsewhere, was just a staff member who got caught up in this as well. But I figure, the roommate angle might work as well. Also, I'm undecided on if they are, romantic interests or not. Because at one point I was toying around with the idea of Urzmaktok being a gay character who had interest in Darb. Because, the strong, strapping, blah, blah, blah. He's who I want to be, and etc. I don't know, so this is just generic roommates. Basically, it was a calm, uneventful journey to the Mushroom Cavern. The light drip of water was actually quite calming. They got the mushrooms, but felt a strange vibration under their feet. It subsided, so they pressed on. Like a little earth tremor or something like that. Again, with students being around, casting spells and such, maybe, they, I don't know, shook the ground or something. There is the spell called Earth Tremor. Leaving the cave, they heard the sounds of insects. Insects, to be clear. But something was off. They were a bit too loud. They picked up the pace, but suddenly the earth in front of them exploded. I forgot that word, apparently. Merrick went toe-to-toe with the large insect monster. Go! Get help! Urzmaktok was hit as he passed the cave entrance, blacking out. Basically, they were kind of near the entrance, and I have the map in a couple slides. So, he got hit by something as he was running out and blacked out. Pre-session cutscene. Final piece. Urzmaktok was found by a couple of students outside the cave, but, he was hurt and barely conscious. Taken to the infirmary, he was cared for. He asked after Merrick, but no one had seen him. Worried, he asked, the staff members to find Darb, Sarah, Burkle, and Kima. Because, they would go in there and try and save Merrick. Brad note, yeah, here it is. Merrick was in my original script, but he wasn't with Urzmaktok, so this changes the session a little bit. He was staff who was captured looking into the caverns after Urzmaktok's attack. Or before. Not sure. It was going to be the cliche scene of, oh hey, I'm hearing weird stuff in the caverns, I better go check it out. Bonk. And captured. Because, fortunately or unfortunately, he is going to be a part of the session later on. Spoiler warning. But, deep in the caves, Merrick is tied down and a cloaked figure stands over him. I wonder, what effect will this have on a humanoid? And then, the screen goes dark. It's, just a cold open for the session. At the Fire Jolt Cafe that afternoon. Darb was at the counter wiping one of the glasses with a rag. It had been a slow day. Spring break meant fewer students were around and the clothes had been good. They had the case, cleaned out, shelves dusted, stocked, etc., etc. Stuff, normal cafe stuff. Burgle and Sarah rushed in looking concerned. It took Darb a second to, realize the concern, but yeah, it's Urzmaktok. They found him outside the Sedgemoor caverns. He was attacked by something. Co-worker comes out of the back room. Sarah talks to her while Burgle tries to shake Darb from his shock. That cliche thing of just, PTSD, 1,000-yard stare, and just, yeah. Because, that's the kind of character that Darb is. He is unfortunately shaken by this. As Sarah's talking to the coworker, we suddenly hear a loud crack. The glass Darb held cracked in his hand. A bit of blood from cuts and glass shard. and there was a bit of blood on it, and there were glass shards, in his hand, clearly. Yeah, maybe you should take Darb to get his hand looked at. Darb moved stiffly and awkwardly, toward the door before he rushed off. Again, I don't know much about, shock, shell shock and stuff like that, but this is just, the movie version of, like, okay, he's clearly shaken, hence he's moving awkwardly, and then moving fast, like, yeah. Going to the infirmary, Darb enters holding his hand, Sarah and Burgle are on his heels. Looking for Urzmaktok. Again, Darb breathing heavily, an implied panic attack. Burgle and Sarah rushed up, sorry about that. There was, a little incident, at the cafe, broken glass. Yeah. Two student, staff members of the infirmary came up, looked Darb over, noticed it was just his hand, and then, asked for consent. Hey, we're about to cause calm emotions on you. Is that all right? Like what I would imagine, medical stuff is like. And, he said, yeah, and it did help. Darb looked to Burgle or Sarah and, said, I'll, check on Urzmaktok. I'll be there soon. Cutting to Urzmaktok's room. Urzmaktok and Chemo were casually talking. Basically, things seemed like they were fine. So, they were just shooting the breeze about classes and stuff like that. I don't really have any sample dialogue because, again, Chemo was kind of a surprising character to bring in, so I didn't think about this, but yeah, just pretend. Nice stuff, whatever. Finally, Burgle and Sarah came in, and then a few minutes later, Darb was allowed in. Darb just had a bandaged up hand. They cast healing on him, but, you can't. They just want to make sure the wounds didn't get infected, blah, blah, blah. Whatever. Urzmaktok finally explained to everyone. Yes, I was getting supplies to create something to nullify the black ooze. Professor Trotsky and I have a formula. We needed white bell caps, but my sample bag was taken. Also, my friend Merrick was taken as well. And that, gave everyone pause. I'm sorry, someone's missing? Darb said. And Urzmaktok, tears in his eyes, looked at him and said, it's my fault, but I'm in no state to act. Please find him. With that, Darb was in a bit of shock again. Like, the stakes were bad, knowing that your friend was hurt. Now, there's someone who is hurt, potentially, in the caverns themselves. After you found out your friend had been beaten up or attacked by something. But yeah, so again, Darb has that 1,000-yard stare. Burgle and Chemo were offering assurances that, hey, we'll get in there, we'll find him, everything's going to be fine. You just rest up. That's the important thing, And Sarah was frowning in thought. She's just trying to come up with a plan for what are we going to do. Darb rose and made his way to the door. Again, stiffly, mechanically, again, showing signs of shock. Sarah, looked up curiously and, said, Darb? Darb? As he moved out the door, like he was not listening. A quick exit. Darb was basically, I got these in two separate columns because it's going to go left to right. So, Darb was rushing out of the infirmary across the campus. Sarah rushed after Darb. Darb, hey, Darb, talk to me. No response. He just marched on. Darb, we need to make a plan. We need to wait for the others. Again, no response. And she was like, Darb, if you don't stop, I'm going to stop you. And she cast the spell Chill Touch on him. I forget the exact specifics, but basically it's a ranged attack where you are grabbed in, like, with cold damage. And Darb turned on her, tears in his eyes. You know, Darb's thing being the last bit. Fucking thing didn't want to go. It's not your fault. It was tense as Sarah and Darb stared one another down. You know, Burgle and Kima caught up without hesitating. They went to Darb to talk him down. You know, Kima pulled him down to her level, you know, staring into his face. Hey. It's not your fault. We didn't know, and now we need you to lead us in there to save Merrick and the samples. And that really hit home. You know, Darb shook his head and collected himself. You know, and he took a deep breath, and he was like, you know, he had his game face on. You know, all right, get your gear. We'll meet up at the cavern in 2 hours. You know, I'm going to ignore the damage he took here. You know, he got healed again, let's say, or something to that effect. Quick Brad notes. At points in the story, I think it's okay for the party to get some upgrades or unique equipment. Within reason, of course. I gave Darb a glaive, which is basically a two-handed slashing weapon that grants an additional 5 feet of reach. I've actually got one myself, for real, because I thought it was cool. But yeah, you know, Darb's reactions here were an homage to Perrin from the Wheel of Time series. Basically, he returned home to tragedy and went into shock. You know, he crushed a glass in his hand, you know, and he reacted poorly to finding out that a number of people he cared about were permanently gone. You know, and the woman that would ultimately become his wife, you know, eventually, you know, after like some time of seeing him just, you know, being torn apart by this inside of him, you know, just walked up to him and said, "It's not your fault. Grieve." And basically the chapter ends, you know, with him just, you know, like he had his arms around her to like pick her up and move her aside, and he just broke down. You know, and he's just crying. You know, I came as quick as I could. You know, I did what I could to, and he was blaming himself, and I get that. I haven't had anything that extreme, but I get blaming yourself for bad things happening. But yeah. Alright, so outside the cave that evening. Originally when I wrote this, basically everything happened in the morning, and then they were at the cave by the late afternoon. But, you know, with, you know, finding Urzmaktok in the morning, and then them getting called in, probably by, you know, like, I want to say, like, he was found maybe around 10 o'clock or so, and then it took till probably noonish for people to find everyone to, you know, get to Darb and the party. So that's why it's evening here. You know, they got, basically they're just doing one last quick team huddle outside of the cave. Alright, find Merrick is our priority, and speed is also very important. We don't know what's in there. We want to get in and out as fast as possible. Am I clear? And then basically just discussing, like, you know, the search pattern for this. Yeah. Alright, let's make our way into the farthest step. I forget who said it, but I'm just going with Darba's voice for this. Let's make our way into the farthest steps to look for Merrick in the case. That way we can focus on getting out if things get dangerous. You know, I've got some extra torches. They may come in handy. You know, and somebody pipes up. I don't want to say it was Kima. You know, but we've all got dark vision, don't we? And basically my explanation for that is one of the cliches with monsters that live under the ground is that, you know, bright light surprises them and actually stuns them and hurts them, because, you know, going from darkness to light. So that's why they have the torches. Also, you might have that cool moment of smashing something across the face with a torch and it explodes. Like, the moment I'm thinking of is the Rundown from, well, the movie The Rundown with The Rock and Sean William Scott. Alright, and then really quick, we'll stick together. Dark will take point, as he's the big guy, with now a glaive. Burgle will be carrying the map, make sure that they don't get lost, and you'll see the map in the next slide, but it's not too crazy. Sarah will be support behind him, for front or back, and then Kima will be bringing up the rear again as support. My personal logic for this was, you got the fighter in the front, then you've got, a support caster right behind him, a secondary support caster, and, who can shoot front or back. And then Kima is another martial class, so she can bring up the rear. Also, with her monk mobility, she can get back to the front easily. I'm not going to be as, detail-oriented with my players, but I'm just establishing this for the narrative. Alright, so we have the Sedgemoor Caves map on the right there. Basically, as you can see in the top left, you got the fish cavern. Basically, it's a fish cavern, for druid and fish-related activities and such. Oh hey, we got aquatic life, because the Sedgemoor, the swamp, leaks into the farther parts of the cavern, where that blue line, behind that blue line somewhere. Then in the upper right, we have the bat caves, basically for bat guano and other druid-related stuff. Because one of the key components for the spell Fireball is bat guano. But I'm sure, they use guano for other things. Also, it's a cave. Bats are going to be there, blah, blah, blah. In the middle left, you have the Mushroom Cavern. Basically, it's a college campus. They're going to have, various fungi growing. So then in case they need them for supplies for classes and such, is the best excuse I've got for that. Just let me have this. And then the bottom right, is mining samples. Basically, these are defunct, ore veins for copper, iron, basic stuff, just so people can see and identify and understand, oh hey, how ore veins work in the natural world. I don't know anything about them myself, so I made this up, so just let me have this. That's probably going to be my trademark catchphrase. Alright, entering the cave. Basically, things were pretty quiet to start. As the party moved forward, they confirmed their map with what's in the cave. Mining areas near the front, etc. The best idea I have is to let the party choose if they explore an area, then make a roll to determine what they find. With the case, Merrick, another random battle, which I think I talk about in a couple slides with luck rolls. The party decides to go deeper in the cave. Basically Sarah says, I believe, going deeper into the mine seems most logical for kidnapping, or if it's an animal. Basically, the person wants to be farther in the cave, so that's less likely people are going to find them. As well as with an animal, it's going to have its den further back in the cave where people were not going to go most of the time. So, if you remember the map, and sorry I don't have it again for reference, the farthest back room was the fish pond. Right before where it gets, flooded and, a bit too messy for most students to use. There is a large gate that cuts off, access to the back areas. And basically, the party see it. It's clearly not broken, so in theory, whatever took Merrick will not be past that. That is our logical guess. But yeah. Basically, there's a plaque by the entrance for aquatic life, not washing or disposal. Yes, even in the magic world, people are idiots and jerks and will do terrible things with water. It really crosses me. And that was a totally deadpan joke, because I love water. You know why. It's good for your kidneys and staying hydrated. Drink water. I should get sponsored by a water company. I hope I do. Or make my own water. Let me get back to the show, though. There's a gate mechanism on the door. You know, just for if you need to trap the party. That's a quick little DM note. Like, basically, there's just one of those, you know, gates that comes down. That's all I've got. So, like, by the entrance, you know, there's that wheel. You know, you turn it, and then the gate goes up or comes down, depending on what you need. And there's, you know, a locking mechanism. I don't think I need to visualize that for you. But if you want me to, I can later. I don't know. We'll see what I feel like when I'm editing this. You know, as for with every room, I'm going to have everyone make a perception check, you know, to explore the room. Sarah got an 18 plus 1, 19. Yo, looking around, there isn't really much to find in the room, so, nah. Basically what I imagined was there were like 4 or 5, you know, large bodies of water. You know, some holding fish, and other aquatic life. You know, so, Burgle explored, rolled a 14. You know, he was like, oh, hey, there's little fishies, and, you know, I was a bit amused by that. Darb rolled an 8, and let's just say, like, he stepped in a puddle, and he's like, ah, man, and, you know, just focused on drying out his boot. Unfortunately, Kima got the worst of it with a nat 1. Basically, she looked into a large pool at the back of the room. You know, she noticed one of her, like, hair ties was messed up, and, you know, was fixing it. You know, was looking in the water for a reflection and fixing it when suddenly a creature burst up out of the ground, you know, nearby. This is the Ankheg. I think that's how you say it. It's my guess, but yeah. Again, the things of note are the armor class of 14, the hit points of 39 or 60, 10 plus 6. It has a burrow speed, dark vision, does bite attack, and it has acid spray. Acid, you know, bite attack is melee range. Acid spray spits acid in a line that is 30 feet long and 5 feet wide, provided that it has no creature grappled. Each creature in that line must make a DC 13 dexterity saving throw, taking 10 3d6 acid damage on a failed save, or half as much on a successful one. With this, I just went with the 10 because, like, it is a rough number, but yeah. So the Ankheg combat. Basically, like with the last combat, I tried having, you know, the character action or the HP of character, monster, etc. in the top bar, and then the below was basically just summarizing what happened, you know, narratively. In the case of Darb, he wasn't attacked at all, so I just put he attacked with the cantrip Booming Blade, then used Action Surge to attack again, and he missed. He attacked for 12 damage, basically slicing the creature, you know, and it shrieked loudly, throwing off his balance. Really quick, the cantrip Booming Blade basically is like a normal melee attack, but if the creature moves of its own accord, then it takes a certain amount of damage. I believe at third level, I believe at this level, it's 1d8, and then it goes up at level 5. I think. I forget. Moving on to Burgle's attack. He pulled out a short bow that he got from Campus Daredevils, and he missed. You know, shot went wide, blah, blah, blah. Not much else to say. Kima, she got to attack, and it's kind of crazy. Quarterstaff hit it for 10 damage. She has the Goblin feature, whatever, Fury of the Small, giving her plus 3 damage. Basically, depending on your level, you add that much damage to one attack per short rest or long rest, I forget. Then using Flurry of Blows, it gave her 2 more unarmed strikes. Hit it twice, doing an additional 11 damage, and then totaling everything up. She did 24 damage in that round. Basically, narratively, she smashed the Ankheg across the face with her quarterstaff like a bat, and then pounded his thorax. And really quick, because I remember some of these future adventures, Kima is like the damage dealer of the group for a bit. Darb does his best, he does good damage, but kinda hard to compete with multiple hits in a row and yada yada. The ink egg itself. It bit at Kima, it missed. She's a small, nimble lady. Simple as that. The HP summary is right there. So we've got Darb's 12 damage. We've got 13. Right. The 13 from the first attack with the quarterstaff. The 11 from the second attack, which was the Fury of Blows. And then, well, we'll see in the next turn. Sarah defeats it with Magic Missile. I believe it was level 1. Minimum of 6 damage versus 3 HP. Basically, it was pelted with magic and then it fell over dead. Simple as that. Post-combat, the Batcave. Basically, right after combat, everybody just looks at each other. You good? You good? Everyone's a bit shaken, but yeah, no, I'm fine. That's crazy. Alright, so, let's move in case there are more. Simple as that. Let's get out of here, blah, blah, blah. Stealth check to not disturb the bats. Because the bats were the next cave section in whatever. That's where they go next. Kima rolled a 15 plus 5 for a 20. So, she passed. She's cautious, definitely on edge after the Yankeg attack, so, watching blah, blah, blah. Burgle, again, small guy, bit anxious, nervous, on edge, like a certain DM that you might know. So he's cautious as well. He passes it. I think my DC for this that I made up was like 10. Darb and Sarah. Darb rolled a 7. Basically, he was not looking where he was going and he tripped on something. I think he gets hit at the bottom. Yeah. Slipped in something, fell, dropping his glaive with a loud clatter. Sarah's brushed by a few bats before she could duck, and the cliche, one last bat at the end. You've seen enough cartoons and movies and stuff like that where, like, a million bats fly out of a cave, and then there's just that one last bat, who was, like, asleep for an extra 3 seconds or something that just flies at the end. For comedic effect. And really quick, explaining Sarah's disadvantage because of cloth armor. Basically, she has cloth armor now since she took the Bladesinger class at the end of the last session. Unfortunately, cloth armor gives you disadvantage on stealth checks. Oh boy. I have good news for you. We found a Merrick. I've also got some bad news for you. Well, the party were on guard, and as they heard heavy footsteps marching their way, a dwarf appeared around the corner, but he was quite large and had glowing red eyes. If you don't remember, that's bad. Okay, I'm going to try my best to do this voice really quick. Y'all shouldn't be here. You must be punished. And clearly, of course, because RPG cliche, he has the sample bag. So yeah, and he doesn't seem very happy to see you guys. For this, I went with the Dwerger stat block. Basically, Dwerger are undead dwarves, I think. And it just seemed like the cool thing for infected. The things that are noteworthy here, the AC of 16, the hit points of 26 or 48 plus 6, speed of 25 feet, dark vision, like dwarves normally. Dwerger resistance has advantage on saving throws against poison, spells, and illusions, as well as to resist being charmed or paralyzed. I forget if the spells thing comes into play or not, but I might have messed up on that. Sunlight sensitivity. While in sunlight, the Dwerger has disadvantage on attack rolls as well as on wisdom perception checks that rely on sight. Again, see? The cliche thing of, I live in the dark, I don't like the light. Enlarge. This is an interesting thing. Basically, for a minute, the Dwerger magically increases in size along with anything it is wearing or carrying. While enlarged, the Dwerger is large size. Doubles damage dice on strength-based attacks, included in the attacks. Make strength checks and strength saving throws with advantage. The Dwerger lacks the room to become large. It attains the maximum size possible in the space available. So, going back to the quick scene, whenever he's peering around the corner, he's basically, like, I would say about 6 foot. Because I want to say, like, dwarves are around 3 to 4 feet, so I figured double size is, like, large for them. So, yeah. For his attacks, he has the War Pick. 4 to hit piercing damage, or 11 to hit. I forget. Oh wait, yeah, 1d8 plus 2 piercing damage, or 11. Oh right, yeah, that explains. Duh. So yeah, javelins. I didn't use javelins in this fight, just for reference. And then invisibility. The Dwerger magically turns invisible until it attacks, casts the spell, or uses it to enlarge. Yeah. Basically, I just ignored the invisibility thing because it didn't really come into play. Like, the black ooze that hasn't been infecting things has basically turned them into violent killing machines. So, invisibility not really a top priority for this thing, but yeah. I'm sorry, for this individual, sorry. Lunchtime. Alright, so, Darb steps forward, trying to intimidate, persuade, Alright, give us the bag and nobody has to get hurt. And Merrick just laughs it off. You can't leave so soon. It's almost lunchtime. And you can hear chittering sounds from down the tunnel. They sound like the Ankeg that you fought a couple of minutes ago. Oh yeah, really quick. I imagine he has a southern western accent and talks like a Deadite of the Evil Dead or a Shadow Person of the Alan Wake series. Basically, they were really mean, they loved to taunt their victims and say harsh things, etc., etc. So, hopefully the southern and western thing is coming through in the voice. I probably should show clips or something, or try and distort my voice for that, but I don't know how to do that, so I'm skipping it for now. This is an outline. If I come back for a third pass where I make things visual, then I will try and do it. For now, you get the basics. Alright, Sarah and Kima nodded to one another, then looked at Darb and Burgle. Alright, you guys get the bag. We'll handle the exit. Brad, now, since the last fight went so easy, I thought, what if I split the party? So the boys fight the Dwerger and the ladies fight another Ankeg. I don't know why, the split wound up like that. It just went like that. Do not make assumptions about me and chauvinism and blah, blah, blah. Alright, so 2 combats, turn number 1. So basically, all the combat steps are in this. And then, as it progresses, because it does go to at least turn 2, I can see from my slideshow, we'll go from there. The ladies run back down the tunnel, and they find another Ankeg coming up the tunnel at them. Kima used Dragon Breath. DC 12 dex save. Failed. Took 5 damage. Sarah used her Blade Song ability. It gives her +2 to AC, advantage on concentration checks, test +10 feet of movement. Like, unfortunately, none of that really matters, but yeah. But the thing that does matter is the attack Tasha's Mind Whip. DC 12 intelligence saving throw. Basically, if you pass it, if you fail it, you only get 1 action in your turn. So you can, move, attack, or react. You cannot do multiple of those. So yeah, Unfortunately, it passed. And visually, you know, Sarah casts her hand out and purple energy encircles the monster's head and, like, just pops. And, like, it, you know, should rock back dazed, but it passed the check, so it didn't. Now it's the Ankeg's turn. It used acid spit at Kima, failing. She failed and took 10 damage. And then the monster moved to melee range. Basically what I imagined was, you know, the girls are down at one end of the tunnel. The thing's, like, some way down the tunnel, so, you know, they meet up. I figured that was fitting. And really quick, that's the 10 damage for Kima at the top. And then the damage so far for the Ankeg in the middle. You know, the camera pans back to the other fight with Burgle, Darb, and Merrick. Burgle cast Shatter on Merrick. It's a DC 13 con save. He failed, took 10 damage, and then he gave Darb Bardic Inspiration. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah, basically, you know, Burgle pulled out his flute, you know, played a quick little tune, and then hit a really high note. Because, you know, the cliche of, you know, high note shatter glass. Ha ha ha. You know, but yeah. Darb went for a glaive attack, he missed, even with the inspiration. And then Merrick went for a pick attack and hit Darb for 11 damage. That's how you hit, son. Like, basically what I imagined was Darb wasn't used to the glaive and, you know, swung and stumbled and walked right into a war pick to the side. Alright, 2 combats, turn 2. Kima, staff attack, hit for 5 damage. Flurry of blows, missed twice. Basically, she drove, you know, the end of her staff into the creature's, you know, gut, thorax area. And then tried to, you know, hit it with her fists and feet. But yeah, the creature was writhing wildly, so she was lucky to have not gotten hurt, to be honest. Sarah then used Tasha's Mind Whip, DC 12 intelligence check. I forgot to put in his damage, but luckily I noted it's below. Took 7 damage for that attack. And only has 1 action for the next round. This will come up later, but my interpretation of 1 action for the next round is even if the creature has multiple attacks, it only gets 1 attack. Just saying. This thing only has 1 attack per turn, so yada yada. It works out fine here, but just establishing that little seed for later. It went for the bite attack at Sarah and missed, thankfully, because she's still very soft and squishy. Burgle once more cast Shatter on Merrick, and he took 8 damage. I think he failed the con save. I forget how Shatter works. It's been a minute. Darb, you know, is close enough by. DC 10 con save. You know, he fit. You know, Merrick failed, took 10 damage. You know, and then as dude's basically falling to the ground, you know, sparking with electricity, Darb runs to help out Sarah and Kima. Merrick was defeated turn 2. Unconscious, vomiting black goo, you know, returning to normal appearance. So basically, cinematically, you know, Darb cast Thunderwave. Basically, drove his spear, like, into the ground, and just a wave of thunderous force erupted outward from him, and just knocked Merrick back. And, like with the frog fight, it's, you know, snapped him back to normalcy. You know, as Darb is running to help out the girls, Burgle's rushing to check on Merrick, make sure, you know, he's not really seriously hurt. Moving to the Ankeg battle. Kima's 14 HP. She goes for a staff attack, she misses. She goes for the flurry of blows, hitting it for 10 damage. So, like, cinematically, you know, she tries to, like, hit it, like, swing her staff, but the shot goes wide for whatever reason. You know, maybe it, like, grabs it with its claws, and she's like, oh, that was a mistake, and BAM! BAM! Just, like, fists to the thorax. Sarah went for Magic Missile. It's an auto-hit attack, and did a total of 7 damage. I'm not going over Magic Missile. But yeah, so Ankeg's HP, it went down 10 HP from the flurry of blows, so it's down to 7, and then the 7 damage was just enough to take it out. Combat is over. You know, and then as the creature's, you know, falling to the ground dead, you know, Darb rushes in, you know, looks the girls over like, damn, good work. You know, and Burgle was tending to Merrick in the other room. Merrick was breathing. It was, you know, his breathing was labored, you know, as he lay on his side. Basically, what had happened was he got blasted with a thunder wave. He was knocked back. He vomited the black goo out of his system, and then he collapsed to the ground. You know, like we've seen in the past. And, you know, Burgle got him onto his side and was, you know, using like healing word, healing touch, etc., to at least stabilize the guy. Alright, recover and retreat. Basically, you know, just that cinematic moments, you know, after the fight, everybody takes stock, make sure they're good before they press on to get, you know, out of the dangerous place. Darb used second wind. Basically, you know, he used a bandage on his pick wound. He healed 5 damage for himself. You know, like, obviously that pick wound hurts. And basically, you know, again, if this were a cinematic moment, we, the audience, see that, you know, it's very red because blood, and it's got some strange black lines spidering away from it, almost as if it's not just, you know, a normal pick wound. Dun dun dun! Should have this at the end, but he also picks up the dwarf, which gives him disadvantage on athletics checks, action to set him down without hurting him. You know, those are just personal rules I made up for this. I will explain, I think in the next slide. I forget. But, yeah, basically, you know, he won't be able to, he'll have to make, like, athletics checks or something as they go to make sure he doesn't, you know, fall or hurt Merrick. Sarah, you know, will collect the case and get a black goo sample. You know, she opens up the case, notices that all the white bell caps are, you know, safely tucked in small vials. You know, everything's intact here. You know, and she gets a bit of the black ooze and puts it in another small black vial. Because, again, it's good to confirm this stuff. Even though at this point, after how many attacks, it's pretty clear it's the black goo. Burgle healed Kima for 4 damage. Basically, what I had said was Kima, you know, took the acid burn on her shoulder. You know, so her skin was a bit red and irritated from the attack. You know, and then Kima, you know, smirked at Burgle. You know, you should see the other guy. You know, trying to play it cool and tough, but she does genuinely appreciate the aid that he's offering her. Exiting the cave. Really quick couple of notes. Brad, you know, maybe have luck check to see if they have any issue exiting the cave. You know, use your own discretion. You know, I chose rodents and other small pests with quote-unquote creative play, you know, to allow the players to skip a fight. You will see that in a second. The lineup has changed slightly. Sarah will take the lead because, you know, she's got the strong magic. Burgle, still with the map, will be right behind her, again, offering support. Darb will be the third person now, carrying Merrick, and Kima will be bringing up the rear, and will have her Dragon Breath ability in case of trouble. But yeah. Alright, moving out. Burgle gave Darb inspiration. I honestly don't think I used disadvantage on this. I just think I just had him make an athletics check, and yeah. But 14 plus 6, 20 to pass. You know, no issue carrying Merrick. I made up the DC, and this is where I think luck rolls came out of it. You know, luck roll, luck roll for like encounters. You know, no modifiers on this. So 10 plus, you pass without issue. 5 to 10, you know, there's a minor issue. Maybe if you use a spell or unique action, you can just, you know, avoid the fight entirely. If you roll a 4 or below, you're going to have to fight a rat or a sturge. Those were the things from session 2. I didn't run into that, luckily. Again, spoilers, blah, blah, blah. Sarah, luck rolled a 6. Basically, there were eyes staring out. She waves the torch to scare them off. Maybe should have made her roll intimidate. My bad on that. Basically, I guess with this, I just used the 2 outside characters. Chemo, luck rolled a 5. Bats were coming, and she used her breath weapon. She did barbecue a few, which, yeah, but I think it worked more effectively as just, oh, hey, I'm scaring off the things, or they flew up and above and just kept going. Like, they were not going to stop to attack them. They were not evil. And I feel a little bad now. Sorry. This was just a bit of extra content I made up. Use it or don't. Either way, you're good, I think. Alright. Outside story bits. The party reached the exit. Darb looked sweaty and exhausted, though. Like, yeah, carrying, Merrick is a bit more work than the others were having to put in, but it was concerning. Like, he's running a fever as if he has an infection of some kind. Dun, dun, dun. Basically, he set Merrick down, like, they found a grassy spot outside of the caves. Like, you walk a good 10, 15 feet. Oh, hey, it's grassy. It's nice. It's well maintained. He set Merrick down as gently as he could, and then Darb, like, basically collapsed, like, next to him and rolled onto his back, just staring up at the evening sky, just breathing heavily and just, face just pinched in pain, like, oh, I'm hurting bad, guys. Like, he just shut his eyes and just, so Sarah takes charge at this point and gives orders. She tells Kima to go to the infirmary, see if they can meet us. Basically, and then Kima gives Darb's shoulder a quick squeeze, and a shaky thumbs up, like, hey, just hang on, I'll be back as fast as I can. And she takes off quickly. Like, I think at this point she has 40 feet of movement, which, considering she's, a small-sized character who normally has 25 feet, that's pretty quick. But, yeah. Next, Sarah orders Burgle to get Professor Trotsky or Professor Lang. They've been working on an antidote for the infection. There's potential he is infected. I don't know how clear that is to the character, but still, having them on hand, for anything would be useful. And Burgle looks to Sarah and gives her some advice. All right, Sarah, you're gonna keep him seated and give him water. Keep him hydrated and cool, and just let him rest. If anything comes out of there, you got to take care of it. And like, he's clearly shaking, like, tears in his face, like, do not let anything happen to my best friend. And like, she just gives him that dead look, dead serious look of, I know nothing is going to happen. And basically, for that 10, 15 minutes that people are not there, she checks on Darb and Merrick. She notices, the blood pooling underneath Darb's side, and just like, Darb, I gotta look at this, and, just pained face, he's just like, yeah, I got it. Do it. And, basically, the bandage that he put on in the caves, within the last, like, 10, 15 minutes, is already saturated with blood. And, Sarah gets to see that these dark, spidery veins around it. She feels like his body heat, like, he's definitely heating up very fast. And, like, she peels the bandage off, like, he's like, oh, yep, that hurts. Because, when you peel a bandage, it stings. And she applies a new bandage and, puts a, cold compress to his head, like, hey, alright, you did good. Just lay back down, just rest up, everything's gonna be fine. Chemo's on the way, just hold on. And like, Darb just, pained face just nods and then just seems to, like, pass out. Like, Sarah's concerned, leans in, like, okay, still breathing. He's still got a pulse, just urging, Kima and Burgle to hurry up. She just shakes her head and she says, "You should have said something." Like, we're seeing the cracks, in her, I'm too cool for this armor. She's worried about her friend who might be dying right now. Alright, it arrives. Kima returned with a pair of students to transport Darb and Merrick. Quick Brad note, maybe, the pick can spread the infection. I used it for drama, but maybe we can add on to the stakes of the situation. And, add in con saves for the character. That depends, on if you want to do this in, harder mode for your players or not, is my personal opinion. I just added this personally for drama and the narrative. Leading to a conversation with Professor Lang. Sarah and Kima waited for Burgle and the professor. Things seemed to be going well after they'd gotten to the infirmary. They had, Darb and Merrick in separate rooms and they were being tended to and, yeah. As they're sitting in the waiting area, waiting to hear back about Darb and Merrick, Kima grabs, takes hold of Sarah's hand, looks her in the eyes and says, you did good, Sarah. Thanks. I was lost in that one. I was in a panic, after Darb, basically collapsed to the ground. You really stepped in and you helped him out, and thank you. And you see the tears in her eyes, and and the two just hug. Yeah. Burgle eventually arrives with Professor Lang. After checking in with Darb and Merrick, everything seems to be going well, blah, blah, blah. Sarah looks to Professor Lang and says, "Let's talk outside." Clearly she's very mad right now. So they go outside of the infirmary. We got the case, but I want some answers. You asked us to help, but what have you done? Sarah says, stabbing an accusing finger at Professor Trotsky. Professor Trotsky just bristles at that. She's not been talked back to by a student like this, ever. And she's offended by that. That is privileged information, and you simply do not need to know. And basically that's where Sarah's rage just breaks for her. You owe us something. At least Darb, Urzmaktok, and fucking Merrick, after all the crap that we've been through, okay? And she just throws the bag on the ground at the professor's feet. And the professor, just... Sarah throws the bag and then storms back into the infirmary, just disgusted. The professor collected the bag, stared at the infirmary, looked in the direction of her lab and just walked off, a bit ashamed. But, I mean, now with the white bell cap, she can do something. In the morning, Darb and Merrick are released from the infirmary. Merrick couldn't remember what he'd done as a dwerger. Basically, the official statement for any incident reports on this was, he was with the party, they were attacked, and he actually hit Darb with his pick. That's it. They do have the evidence, of the Ankeg bodies in the caverns, so, yeah. The Sedgemoor and the Sedgemoor caverns were closed after the incident while an investigation was conducted into the wildlife and such. There you go. Alright, just a couple of quick slides with the post-session notes. The party will level up to level 4. In the book, if you go by what sessions they have there, the party are supposed to level up after the next session. Session 10, which is Into the Sedgemoor, if I remember the title right. But I figure with my homebrew session, it's okay to level them up. Also, I want them to be able to use their level 4 skills before the year ends. I honestly don't have any plot for year 1 after this. And then just some quick notes on, when homebrewing, think about what the enemy can do. I'd considered giving ranger abilities to Merrick, but that might have been too much for my team. Basically, I looked at what would a level 3 or 4 ranger have, and some of the things they felt a bit much to me, so I axed them. I can't go into specifics because I forgot them, because it's been so long since I ran this session, but just, yeah, the Dwarger stat block, it felt fitting, and like the damage that he did to Darb was enough. And basically my personal philosophy of, I go by, if I didn't fight this, I'm not going to make you fight it. And and we'll see, like, in the sessions to come, like, in years 2, 3, and definitely 4, like, I kind of have some distinctions that, change certain sessions from, easy, normal, and potentially hard mode, or just easy and hard mode. Like, I know for sure I do in the next session, like the final boss fight. There's a normal or easy boss fight, and then there's a hard boss fight. I ran both. I went through, I made sure I had the stats right for the second run through, and yeah, we'll get to that. But just think about this, as a DM. Like, what can your people face? If it's in the book, it should be fine. If you're homebrewing and making up your own ideas, you might want to playtest a thing or two, is my personal opinion. Post-session notes 2. Session 10 is the final official session of the year. I do have an idea for a summer vacation session or sessions. Basically, it was from the Explorer's Guide to Wildemount. A short quest called The Tides of Retribution, from page 206 to 216. Basically, the short version is there's a conflict between a seaside village and underwater dwellers. I did not play this out, so I don't have an outline for it, but it felt fitting. Basically, it's the anime cliche beach episode. Oh, hey, we're going to the beach, we're going to have some fun and stuff. Oh no, chaos ensues. That's honestly all the logic I had for that. I did not get to run through it because I got sidetracked and yada yada. But I felt like that was a fitting thing. You could work that in early, you could work that in after, for a summer vacation, whatever you feel like doing, if you want to use that at all. The Wildemount thing, the Wildemount book, I believe, is, the content that Mr. Matt Mercer had made. I don't know. I forget. It's been a while. I haven't read it in a long time, but yeah. The second note. One of the things, that I thought about and I felt was fitting for Strixhaven was, this is like a nice newer player-friendly campaign. So, maybe allow them to make some changes, like, oh, I don't like these spells, so, between sessions, they have the time to change spells. Or, you might not be using things, you might not be using mechanics, that those spells might cover, like, Longstrider. It increases your movement speed. For now, I'm not using, reference for movement speed and such, so, or long jump. So, if they want to change that stuff out, totally fine. I understand. Yeah. Things, like subclass change, changing spells between sessions or in downtime. Or working on projects if they are that type of character. Like, I was thinking, like, specifically an artificer who's like, oh, hey, I'm working on improvements for my steel defender, homunculus, whatever. But, hey, maybe somebody else is working on making their bow better, so they have a +1 bow because they're a blacksmith or something. Or they have a new magic item. I didn't explore this very much. Like, honestly, this is all very vanilla what I've done here and through year 4. Like, if it's not in the book, I didn't necessarily give that to them. Except for, like, near the very end. But, yeah. So Strixhaven, is a nice newer player thing. So if they want to change stuff throughout year 1, like, honestly, let them do that. These sessions are split up so that you can make changes and do different stuff at different times. And we're all here to have fun. So, those are just my thoughts, for this session and, you know, just through the stuff leading up to this session. I think a little more. Right. At this point, this is just extra content that I wrote that I wanted to share because it's fun. You know, I'm a writer. You know, narrative. You know, blah blah blah. Sharing the cinematic experience. You know, basically, so this scene is after we saved Merrick and we're at the infirmary. You know, realizing something seems able to spread this. You know, the party, you know, Darb and Sarah, you know, just casually talking about this. Like, this is the first person that we've seen infected with this stuff. You know, we've seen frogs, we've seen rats, we've seen sturges. Something can spread this, or he found what it was. You know, so we'll have to move quickly before this takes over the campus. It seems like the source is in the Sedgemoor. You know, it's the reason for the party to handle this. Basically, we don't have time to wait for the proper authorities thing. Again, I'm trying to give some incentive for the party to do this. You know, so that's it. Like, it's, you know, it's like Stranger Things. It's like all the cliche movies and stuff like that. Like, we cannot count on anyone else to take care of this. This is on us. Cool. And then, just, again, a little bit of extra content, last slide. You know, the doctor is in. This is like during the night while Darb and Merrick are kept for observation. You know, a stranger checks in on Merrick and or Darb. You know, the villain sneaks in to assess the character, basically posing as, you know, a staff member or, you know, a staff member of the infirmary. You know, or just slips in while the doctors are out. You know, just looks them over. You know, gets close, leans in, looking at the face of whatever character. Doesn't seem as effective via weapon poison. But what to do with you? You know, and then they have like a little wave of their hand and suddenly there's a knife there. And they're obviously going for the, you know, but something interrupts them. The door jiggles, so they have to like misty step out of the room before they're caught. Again, this is just more narrative or cinematic stuff that I just added in for fun. You know, if people like give me an opening for it and they are open to it, I will add this kind of stuff. But it might not fit their story. So, I don't know. Like, I can work this in definitely as a closing, you know, cutscene point, whatever. The second thing, fever dream. Basically, you know, fighting off the infection, or a professor has to use antidote to save the character from turning. Basically, you know, character fighting a dark fog or a shadowy monster. You know, not run the combat, but more storytelling fun. Like, basically, you know, we've seen this in various movies and stuff like that. Someone is sick or dealing with some kind of infection, and, you know, they're having a fever dream of some kind. You know, they're being pursued by some unseen entity or monster. You know, and they're losing. You know, so like we cut back to reality. We're in the hospital room and we see this character, you know, seizing, unfortunately. And I'm going to tell you that's a very awful thing to see. And I hope none of you ever has to see that. I have. And yeah. You know, so, you know, the party will be with that character and, like, panicking, like, do something! You know, and this might be Professor Lang's redemptive moment, you know, where she comes back in with the, you know, antidote and, you know, like, we gotta try this. Like, it's untested, blah, 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 and it works. Again, this is extra content just because it's a fun bit you can add. But some people might just want to see their story and that's it. You know, they might not want these extra cutscenes. I do not know. I think my party would be good with it, but yeah. That's it. Alright, little look behind the curtain. I forgot to add this slide to the other presentation. So forgive me for that, but I updated it in the Session 8 presentation. Because you're probably going to see that and read that, and those of you with good eyes will comment that. And you know what, good on ya, but I cut you off. If you are interested in more of my content, check out youtube.com/hero1922. I have a few series. I have the Strixhaven series, obviously. I've got the Emerald Vanguard campaign. That was where I was a player, and I recapped the sessions with permission from Connor and the other players. If you want to hear this just in audio form, check out, search for Brad the DM. I've done it. I've got at least 3 episodes. I'm going to try and upload more. I just keep getting sidetracked after work and I forget to do it. And then the final bit, if you care to play, feel free to comment below on this video. Hit me up on Spotify. If you know me personally, on Facebook, which I can, provide that information to. Which may not be the best idea, but hey, we'll see. You can hit me up there and we can try and coordinate something. I'm hoping to go back and talk to a couple people who had interest in the past. Callie and your friend for sure, in case you see this for some reason. You're like the top of that list. David, Regina, Brett, if I can figure with any of you, I will also try and figure with you as well. Because I played with you in the past, you guys are good people, etc., etc. Yeah, but yeah, I don't really have much else for signing off session 9 below the Sedgemoor. Besides, this was my homebrew session from my homebrew campaign that I haven't touched in a long time, like probably since before I started Strixhaven. Because homebrewing is hard and complicated. It's worth it. But yeah, I'm just really glad I got to bring that little bit, of the cave system, the Ankeg fight, and add on to that, honestly, with the Dwerger and just the other stuff in the caves. It was cool, it was interesting, and I'm hoping that people like this section as much as I liked writing it. Again, I added in some narrative and cinematic moments, and I tried to explain them as best I can. Because I'm a writer. I'm not a great video editor. I'm not, a cinematic director. I'm just one guy trying to give his outlines to the world because somebody might be able to use them. And, or somebody might just find listening to my voice entertaining, and that's fine with me. This is my way to reach out and give something back to the community that I feel like has given me quite a bit. So yeah, that was session 9 under the Sedgemoor. It was a lot of fun for me. Blah blah blah. I don't think I have any other official statements or things to say, so I will just, use my closing line. Have fun, stay safe, keep hydrated, and of course remember, every character, every player, every NPC, every DM, especially those named Brad, has a story to tell. I'm Valiant Bradley James. I'm Brad the DM. And until next session, have fun, players.